Welcome to MacroEdge Radio. Please note that the content aired on this program is intended strictly for entertainment and educational purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or professional advice. The opinions, discussions, and views expressed by our contributors, guests, and associated MacroEdge staff are their own and do not necessarily represent the official stance, strategy, or opinions of the MacroEdge organization or any of its affiliates. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, MacroEdge Radio makes no representation or warranties of any kind expressed or implied about the completeness, accuracy, reliability, suitability, or availability of the content of this show. Any reliance you place on such information is therefore strictly at your own risk. We do not endorse or assume responsibility for the accuracy or reliability of any information offered by third-party websites linked through the show or any website or feature linked in any banner or other advertising. We will not be a party to or in any way be responsible for monitoring any transaction between you and any third-party providers of products or services. All audio content of MacroEdge Radio is the intellectual property of the MacroEdge organization, and any use, reproduction, or redistribution of this content without the express written consent of the MacroEdge organization is strictly prohibited. All rights reserved.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to MacroEdge Radio. This is John Galt speaking, and today another special Friday afternoon show. And for those who are listening, we are considering moving the show to this time slot or time slot in a very similar way, simply to sit there and accommodate everyone's schedule and to sit there and present options for more of our listeners. Today we have a very special show. We're going to hammer real estate very hard with Melody Wright. I'm just going to give a quick summary of the markets. The market sucked today. There was no volume, but the market sucked. So I think the selling is exhausted. We shall see what happens over the weekend because with all the bizarre news, there's no telling. Gold got slammed. The VIX actually held 16, much to my surprise. Doesn't mean anything yet. We need some serious volume. We need some serious selling. 40,000 on the Dow and 5,500 on the S&P 500 are the key levels to watch. Next week, I'll have six come on and discuss that, the MacroEdge stock guru, so to speak. But today, it's all about real estate. The economy is wavering. Personally speaking, I can only vouch for what's happening in my sphere of influence in the world. I am in the marine industry, and I will tell you right now, the recreational marine industry is a disaster. Layoffs, and the biggest news that I got this morning, which set me off to the noon o'clock bar commiserating on Zoom with my fellow suppliers, was this. All projects planned for 2025 are suspended until further notice from two of the largest boat manufacturers in the United States. Not what I would call an ideal situation for someone in my profession, especially since most of my financing comes from commissions. All right, so that brings us to real estate. Another circus, another crazy show, another problem which is going to sit there and hit everyone. And what makes this more terrifying and even scarier for the masses is that, believe it or not, we might actually have made this situation far worse than the 2005 2008 era with speculative frenzies, creative financing, which is absolute garbage, as our guest Melody Wright will discuss today, and, of course, my favorite aspect of this, hey, let's have short-term rentals in every city imaginable. Let's sit there and put a short-term rental in Arcadia, Florida. Why? Because an Airbnb person will advertise it as only 45 minutes to the beach. Guess what? It's not, and there's a lot of cow pies in your way. So if everyone is ready, Melody, you there? I'm hoping you can hear me. But we've got to sit there and tell you the real estate situation on the commercial side has deteriorated severely. The real estate situation on the residential side is the part that no one is taking into account. Melody, good afternoon and welcome to the program.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
You sound fantastic.
Excellent. How are you doing today?
Back.
Thank you.
I've had better Fridays, I can tell you that. At least I don't have that cold anymore, and I don't have to sell real estate, although it might be a good idea at this point in time. Well, I would just like to ask you the first question. Is the deterioration in the market that we've seen since the last time we talked in May really as severe as we think it is on the residential single-family home side?
Yeah. So, John, over the past 2 days, I've got some really interesting updates that I'm still processing. But, looking at the delinquency picture, I'll start there. We had been hearing a lot of rumors about, delinquencies going up that we couldn't see in the Black Knight data. And Black Knight is who people typically use because they're the largest technology platform in the industry. However, what I've really started to realize is they have a lot fewer loans on their system than they really kind of say. And so that delinquency had been looking very low, but we were seeing other things like the Census Pulse survey with much higher delinquency. And then I was hearing things from the field and seeing things like from Inside Mortgage Finance where certain servicers, or those are the people that take your payment, are not on the Black Knight portfolio, seeing higher delinquency. But this month is the first month we've really seen that delinquency increase in the Black Knight series. I have to be honest with you, I'm still shocked. I'm still waiting for maybe an explanation that somebody reported late or something has happened, but we had a 13% increase in overall delinquency month over month. For everybody's perspective, that is higher. We haven't seen an increase like that since April of 2020. You just don't see that kind of uptick month over month. And so that was a bit of shocking news, with 30 plus delinquency being the highest. And that is the most important, in my opinion, when looking at the consumer, because that's the newer delinquency. Those are the people that have made a decision that they're going to forsake their credit. And, because when they have that 30 days late, it's going to impair them. And so for those of us that have been in the business, you're always watching that early stage delinquency for signs of where the consumer is headed. And so, this is very concerning. I don't know if anybody knows. I don't think Chase has published their Q yet, right? But I want to dive into there to see how much, because they didn't really talk about it in their press release, but, everybody was taking that higher provision. I believe they probably saw some of this on the mortgage side as well, but that was not included in press releases. So I want to definitely check that out soon. So that's on the delinquency side. And as I said, I knew we were going to see upticks. This was shocking even to me. Then we just got Redfin data yesterday. I think a lot of you know that I track over 80 cities, and I'm still shocked. And looking at this data too, sales are just down significantly year over year and month over month. And so something about the Redfin series that I just want to share with everyone is that it closely tracks existing home sales. I've been able to do projections for the last several months based on my cities, and I've come in very, very close to what existing home sales have done. So I am absolutely forecasting we're going to see negative existing home sales both month over month and year over year. And what's striking about that is the 25-year average for existing home sales from May to June is a 10% increase, 25-year average. And just for perspective, in 07, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, we had increases from May to June. So if we veer from this pattern, it is going to be a very significant variance. And I think it's going to say a lot about what's ahead. And so, those are two developments over the past 2 days that, I felt like we were kind of going along the path where we were seeing this weakness. But this is striking, and I think that it kind of notes an inflection point. But I'll stop there, John.
Well, that's a hell of a start for the show. Thank you, Melody.
You're welcome.
But to be quite honest, I got to throw this out here. We're still seeing median prices, quote unquote, on the increase, but I think that's a national average. But on a regional basis, we're seeing deterioration, especially in the Sun Belt, which is the strongest region. And folks, for those of you who don't pay attention to the statistics are very basic in this world. You can distort any statistic you want. When 70% of the sales are occurring in the Sun Belt, for example, right, Melody?
Yes.
Versus the Northeast or the Mountain West, you're going to see a distortion in the median price of anything. What I'm noticing now is that rental prices are deteriorating in Florida, and in my part of Florida at least, and I'm also noticing that multifamily is starting to see a deterioration in rental prices. At the same time, affordability has crashed and burned. I'm going to throw this statistic out from the Michigan survey for you. This is the lowest buying conditions since 1981. Is that not a warning sign for the real estate market that having higher prices, higher rental costs is going to result in a much more dramatic crash, similar to what we saw from 78 to 81. And folks, you'll have to go do your own research on that. I was there as a kid going to school. When you see that kind of data, is that not more alarming than anything else that scares you more? That's a more dramatic downturn than what we saw in 04 to 08.
It's striking, John. I mean, I think that for the longest time on X-Twitter and FinTwit, everyone was scared of saying that this was going to be worse or similar to 2008. And, I came out early saying it was going to be worse. But now I think, it's bearing out to be worse. So what I posted today on X-Twitter is a combined sales chart. And this is an absolute number. This is not adjusted for, what we would think the market would, have expanded since the GFC. And if we come in where I'm forecasting sales to come in based on what I've been tracking, we are going to fall below the 2008 absolute levels, for sales for combined new and existing. I mean, this is going to be really abysmal. So much worse than even the GFC, in my opinion.
So with that being established as a baseline for our discussion today, we haven't seen the foreclosure data catching up to this issue, although we see the delinquencies increasing, as you stated. We've also seen auto delinquencies and credit card delinquencies creeping up in a very parallel pattern. At this point in time, in your opinion, it's very subjective, is this not another case of we expect the government to bail us out to prevent a crash scenario?
Absolutely. And just so everyone realizes, to prevent a crash, I think they realized last time they couldn't prevent the crash in home prices. They were just foaming the runway for the banks and stemming their losses. That's what Geithner says in congressional testimony. And so absolutely, it's not going to stop the correction in home prices, in my opinion, but they just announced a new Fannie Freddie program that will be a target reduction of payment of 20%, including principal reduction. This is not something the GSEs typically get involved with. So this is a big deal. There's going to be a ton of programs. The VA moratorium on foreclosures, it's not mandatory, they say, but they are requesting that servicers extend that through December 31st. So what will happen is what happened last time. As we see increasing defaults, the state AGs will get involved. The groundwork has already been laid with, discussions about servicer errors and things like that during the COVID time period. And these servicers are just not equipped to handle this volume. I mean, John, if I were sitting in a servicer shop right now, I would be having a heart attack. And you can see it even on LinkedIn already. If you're familiar with this industry, certain things start before everything else. And I'm seeing those companies are hiring like crazy right now. That's assignments of mortgage. You have to do those before you refer to foreclosure. That's those early property inspections and also property appraisals that you have to do at 90-day delinquency. But I mean, these are shocking numbers. And again, there might be a data issue, but I looked in my own client books and I was seeing very similar increases. So, but the foreclosures, they just aren't going to come quickly, nor did they last time. And I think that's what a lot of people forget, is that for many years there were moratoriums on the top servicers, and so foreclosures just weren't happening. So we'll see the delinquency. It will get saved by various different government programs, but there are already people that have exhausted every program that they're eligible for, as well as you're going to have the investors who have walked away. And I'm already seeing that in client books as well. They just they're not going to care about trying to get into one of those programs. So it will be impactful, but we won't see significant foreclosures for some time, probably a year from now would be my guess.
All right, I'm throwing this out there. The reason I brought this up is because everyone is expecting a 2007, 2008 type of crash. I don't see that happening immediately, but I do see something happening in the background. And this is more of your forte because I've read a lot of your works. People aren't paying attention to the stealth liquidation of residential mortgage-backed securities by the larger institutions. A lot of the regional banks are still holding on to them, and the prayer that the truth is real estate always goes up. The long-held religious belief, which I've never understood, it's not an investment. It's a tool like a hammer or a car, etc. But we're seeing a liquidation by the larger institutions because they don't want to be the bag holders this time. Is this something you're noticing in the trend in the background, without naming names, which is going to cause a problem with credit quality and the ability to liquidate a lot of these holdings by smaller and regional banks?
Yeah, I think I understand your question, John. Essentially, you're saying credit quality is going to be impacted because you're going to start to see, as we're starting to see price reductions, we're going to see lower equity. Is that where you are going, or did I misunderstand?
That's where I'm going. I'm going
okay.
to two tracks. I'm sorry. Yeah, we're going to see lower equity and a depression of prices, thus reducing the value of residential mortgage-backed securities. At the same time, before that occurs, which is happening now, from what I'm hearing, the larger institutions are liquidating their RMBS holdings and leaving the bag holders to be the smaller and regional banks.
Yes. That is, so there's all this credit risk transfer that's been happening, John. I mean, the agencies are doing it, the big banks are doing it. So, from a history perspective, after the GFC, the new Basel III requirements really made it untenable for the banks to hold a lot of mortgage assets. In fact, all you would hear them talking about was reducing their balance sheet for mortgage. And so as that happened, the non-banks really came in and took over the space, and they do the majority of lending today. And then came COVID, and that SLR, or supplemental leverage ratio, was suspended, and the banks got involved again in mortgage for a little while. What they did once that SLR was put back into place is they started to do these credit risk transfers, securitizations, all kinds of these things. So I believe you're correct in that it's going to be pensions, smaller banks, people like that are going to be left holding the bag, kind of very similar to last time. Is I think that a lot of people are scrambling to get rid of the risk in these assets because they see what's coming. And then that's when, similar on the commercial real estate side, we'll get price discovery as well.
All right. I'm going to bring Six on because he's got time constraints. Six, welcome to the program. Please ask your questions away, sir.
All right, I got a question for you, Melody. So, why do you think that the regional banks wouldn't have already hedged this credit risk? Do you think that they don't know that? Do you think that they don't think that, there's going to be a credit cycle, or is it merely just too expensive to transfer the risk? Like, this is a very slow-moving train, and I'm curious why they wouldn't have already, taken care of this.
Yeah, so that's, Six, that's a really good question. And I, my assumptions about hedging got really thrown in stark relief during the banking crisis last time because, when I was going through this during the GFC, we were hedged. We were doing all sorts of things to protect our portfolios from, very similar duration risk and things like that. So it was very shocking to me that that's just not in favor anymore. I mean, I think on the residential side too, people have been credit quality gospel singing. I mean, including myself until I really started looking under the covers at the automated underwriting systems because I knew what the laws were, what the regs were. I'd worked with all these companies that were theoretically using them, but they didn't understand the weakness on the back end of these underwriting systems. And like any game, you learn how to play it. And so it took me some time as someone coming from within the industry to believe that we were going to have credit quality issues. But I honestly, I hope they're hedged, but based on the last year and a half, I think a lot of them probably aren't. And they also, a lot of people just don't understand these assets. That's the other thing I'm seeing. A lot of your players right now just don't understand and have never been through a cycle like this.
Huh. My other question was, you always hear the housing bulls talk about the housing sales volume is so low because everybody rolled out their weighted average maturities and then everybody refinanced down to 3% while Janet Yellen was selling 2s instead of 30s. To what extent do you think the reason for the sales volume is down because of, people that are married to their interest rate, and what extent do you think it can be attributed to unaffordability?
Yeah, Fannie Mae did its own survey and came out, and they were shocked, which they even said in the results, that the golden handcuffs weren't as big of a reason as they thought. And in fact, unaffordability came in really high as a reason. I think every homeowner that I talk to knows there's nowhere they can go. Like if they cashed out of their property, they wouldn't be able to find a like home at a similar price. And so I think people are stuck for sure. But I think also that you have buyers that have said they're done. They're just done. And so, you've got a buyer-seller strike, and what's happening on the sellers is they're getting more and more motivated because those carrying costs are just too high, and the buyers are still waiting. And so, I think we'll continue this sort of deadlock until probably the spring selling season in Florida again next year, because, you're seeing motivation. You're not seeing desperation. And I think by, the spring selling season, which starts in October in Florida, we're going to start seeing desperation, in my opinion.
Wow. And you said you saw one of the data sets you were tracking is down 13% month over month. What is that one? I want to watch that closely.
So this is just again, I'm just waiting. I cannot wait till Black Knight comes out with their report, because what I'm doing is pulling from their institutional product, and overall delinquency, this is just so shocking to even me, is up 13% month over month. 30-plus delinquency is up 19% month over month. I mean, the only other time period I've seen like this, so if you exclude April of 2020, which I put a chart on X Twitter, I'll try to put in the nest here in a second. If you look at that jump, and there's nothing comparable, even back to the GFC, that 1 month jump. But a comparable period in the GFC was August 2007 to September of 2007, where you saw a similar jump in delinquency. And so, this is, again, I'm saying this is what the data says. I've had people look at the data with me because I couldn't believe it. They may come up with some reason, like, maybe one of their servicers didn't report, something like that. But I'm looking at my individual client books, and I'm seeing similar increases as well. So I think this is what's happening. And I just think your property taxes and increases they crush people this year. I thought it was bad last year, but I saw escrow notices go out for double payments in some case, and I'm not exaggerating, some cases triple, with increases in insurance and taxes. And so these things are just, people cannot afford, waking up and somebody realizing they've got a $500 more a month payment. Now, of course, this is newer vintages of origination that are being impacted the most, because they're the ones that are really getting killed by that assessed value as new owners.
That's crazy. I got to jump here, but thank you, Melody, for your amazing insights as always. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks, Six.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
All right, everybody. There you go. And here's a question I have for you, Melody, because you posted something yesterday that was fascinating, and I do see a problem developing. You were talking about pension funds, state pension funds, et cetera, small banks and regional banks absorbing, or being, my favorite term, the proverbial bag holder. You said that there is an increase of 45% or $20 billion in insurance portfolios adding residential mortgage-backed securities. Is that not the most terrifying thing you've ever heard? The very people who insure the homes the liability, are acquiring more of the very same mortgage-backed securities that they're supposed to insure. Not a conflict of interest question, but is that not the most dangerous thing you've seen as a development? Because those are state-regulated companies, and if any one of their portfolios dips by 5, 6, 7, or even 15%, it's a disaster for the people who have those policies.
Yeah, and so what's interesting about this, John, is it's actually they're buying whole loans and not the MBS, and it's similar. Everything you said is exactly still true. It was more fascinating to me that they were getting into whole loan ownership. That's usually regional banks, and sometimes you're bigger, but they're buying them. I mean, this, if you do this right, it could be very profitable, but you are 100% right that they are definitely putting themselves at great risk. And portfolio loans, this is the other thing. There's so many terms in this industry. Like, I know that most people, half the time that I tweet, it doesn't make any sense because you need a dictionary that's, very large, but portfolio loans are already at a 5.1% delinquency. So for perspective, we're looking at just your regular all loans at 3.94%. So just know that what these guys have been buying is now already at a 5% delinquency. But your point is completely accurate still. These are the people insuring these properties. But a lot of times these people, they just think they're the smartest guys in the room, that they've figured it all out, that they're looking at all of the risks. And this, for whatever reason, people do not see this risk coming, I think, because of all of the narrative around credit quality.
All right, I'm going to take 1 minute here to plug first Melody. If you're not following Melody on Substack, I strongly suggest you get her email updates and follow her on Substack. Also, hey, we're not in competition. MacroEdge provides a data set and unique analysis. MacroEdge.net. Subscribe to get some of the information. Go to the Ozone and get the 2-week free trial. It's worth your time to read the data we're producing. We have a group, including Melody, Tricia, Amy Nixon, and others, who talk about real estate in our private group, and we get insights like this that are far beyond what you see in the mainstream media. Melody also, with Nobody Special, and I cannot remember the other gentleman's name, I'm sorry, has a YouTube channel called the Doomer News Network, which I wish I had thought of that name first, but they beat me to it. So, folks, if you get a chance to watch their videos, there are some very insightful information coming on there. His name Jack, I'm forgetting. I apologize.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
Jack is Nobody Special, and then Travis from Real Estate Mindset.
Travis.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Travis is who I forgot
That's okay.
about. I've known Nobody Special, watching him for a while now, but this is an incredible group of people who provide data, which if you have time to watch or download the audio or listen to it, it's worth your time. Folks, we're trying to give you an alternative point of view, and you're hearing it today. Things are not sunflowers and rainbows like the media is portraying, and that's what's scary about it, because your investing decisions into some of these institutions could affect your long-term ability to retire or have a decent future. One question for you before I turn it over to Kalani, who has a question for you, and he's got the worst real estate situation, knowing his background in Hawaii. God bless the man. When I'm looking at this big picture, we're starting to see deterioration of multifamily paralleling single-family homes. Which one is going to win the race to the bottom first, in your opinion? Because that has an impact on everything that we're witnessing, especially if the government has to start getting involved in bailing out institutions for their poor investing decisions.
Yeah, I think multifamily will probably go first, John. I mean, I think we're seeing it just blow up. I think, that article The Real Deal did on that guy's name that I always, Sunak or whatever, that had the buses, busing people in to look at these multifamily, a lot of times Class B and C multifamily properties to buy up. Those things are just imploding left, right, and center. The limited partners in that are not getting returns. They're being asked, there's cash calls. So I think multifamily will probably blow up before you start to see the weakness is getting super serious in residential. But I think 2025 is going to be a real challenging year for all of these asset classes.
I'm going to ask one final question before I turn it over to Kalani. The ratio of realtors in Florida versus homes for sale is at levels I haven't seen since 2007. Is this a trend we're seeing throughout the United States, or do you have any data to support that? I'm just curious.
Oh yeah. The specific point about the realtors, I think so. I can't tell you absolutely, but there was a time during COVID there were more realtors than there were listings, and I think that a lot of them have given up, but there's still plenty of them out there. But the inventory is coming all over the country, and so this. Florida always leads in the housing market, as you know, John. And so, what starts there just spreads across the country. Now, it is particularly rampant with speculation, but it has been so shocking to me to go to places, where I live, Johnson City, Tennessee, and to see that same speculation, or Unger, North Carolina, outside of Raleigh. Just small towns have been completely, kind of turned over with all these fix and flips and speculation as well as new builds. So I think it's very bad in certain locations, but it's rampant all over the country.
Thank you so much, and I'll come back after Kalani with an STR question because I know everybody loves those. Kalani, are you there, sir?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, you sound fantastic. Please ask your question and talk to Melody.
Hey, Melody. Just
Hello.
a question. From a residential real estate perspective, how do you see all of this playing out geographically?
In terms of kind of the rolling wave, Kalani?
Yeah, I mean, any insights you might have? I mean, during the Great Financial Crisis, we obviously saw certain geographic locations get abused more than others, and I assume the same thing happens this time because speculation is different in every state and city. But do you have any insights as to what you're seeing from a geographic perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know, right, that the Sun Belt was just hammered. I mean, everybody came in. I call it the second Reconstruction. I mean, you just had so many people, so much speculation. But I think that it will impact things on a national level because you can go into any town across the country, go to New Home Source, look for these new communities, and anywhere there was land, there is this building. But I'm working on a forecast, Kalani, to give a better answer to that question. Florida and Texas have already started they've already, hit their inflection point, but you're seeing it in a whole bunch of other states. California, I think, is taking a little longer. They kind of were in the dumps, especially San Francisco kind of got out. But their inventory, they are hitting every week their highest levels of inventory. And I think as soon as we have a meaningful correction in the stock market, California will get over its denial. Arizona has already started joining with its price cuts as well. Tennessee, places in Washington. I mean, it's going to happen all over. How bad the impact will be dependent on the specific things like how much short-term rental was there. And I'm sure, John will ask, but one thing I'm working on in my model is, kind of risk weighting some of these things. Like if you look at Austin, Texas, where there's 15,000 short-term rentals, obviously, that's going to be impacted a whole heck of a lot more than a city where that is not the case. But hope to have something more definitive where I can forecast the way that I think 2025 is going to go down here in the next couple of months.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Melody, my question for you on short-term rentals is this. We've seen a massive change in the regulatory environment on STRs, especially in Florida, because let's face it, you spend $500,000 on a condominium, having 20 college students setting bonfires in the front yard is not an ideal situation, especially on the back nine of a golf course. What do you think the collapse of the STR model is going to be on condominiums and, of course, single-family homes that have sat there and accumulated value based on quote-unquote projected earnings, but it would appear that a lot of the investors in those homes are willing to default and walk away, as some of the stories we've seen, and just let the banks eat it.
Yeah, I mean, there are just so many headwinds, so to me, where there's been so much of this rampant short-term rental, those are going to be, like you say, and we're already seeing it, people are going to walk away. We know that they use the FHA program, illegally. So that is a compliance issue. We know that many communities are either through even local HOAs or through city councils are starting to put in regulations. Right so far it's been a mixed bag. Like, for instance, the Dallas hearing that was supposed to happen because their short-term rental ban got challenged in court, and there's been a stay, and there was supposed to be a hearing in June. I have not heard, I couldn't find that rescheduled hearing date. So I think right now all of these things have had limited impact, but they will have more as people are getting angrier and angrier and angrier about the situation. And I recently talked to, for instance, Marley Price down in St. Petersburg. She's been reporting illegal short-term rentals and has essentially been successful in getting 23 homes to market, which will hopefully be bought by families. But they have a very unique set of regulations down in St. Petersburg. The problem is most cities don't have those regulations. So I think it's going to be very impactful, but it is also a slow-moving bus. And right now, it kind of feels like the short-term rental operators are, I wouldn't say winning, but they still kind of have the upper hand. But I think that dynamic is changing.
But I'm going to throw a really weird wrench at you because you have the experience in finance. Thankfully, I don't. It's just not an insult because I would have, my head would have exploded years ago. Your patience is amazing. What happens when the banks start putting the hammer down on people who do not abide by regulatory wishes in these communities? They could end up foreclosing or enforcing covenant violations against these STR holders, and some of them are small LLCs and corporations for everyone's to know. Especially they were pretty much pushed out in much of Sarasota. What happens when they are into forced liquidation situations and it causes a deterioration and depreciation of the values of the homes in those neighborhoods, putting more stress in the market?
Yeah, so, a couple of things. The way these shops are set up right now, they don't really have the technology or systems to mass enforce some of this stuff. And so I think that you probably won't see that happening until we get a little bit later in the cycle where people are just getting so desperate, and that's probably after the moratoriums. But agreed, John. I think because I see the momentum building. And I think that many people are, they're already going to want to be getting out of those short-term rentals because they relied on something like AirDNA or one of those other technology programs that told them they were going to make $600 a night in Kyle, Texas, which is 20 miles south of Austin, 55% of the year. In reality, they probably made $2,000 last year, if that, for the whole year. And so those people are already going to be starting to try and offload those. And that's absolutely what you're seeing in Austin and places. I mean, Austin just hit its highest number of inventory since I've been tracking. I mean, it's massive. So these things are coming to market now, because they can't afford the carrying costs. And then I think in addition to that headwind, they're seeing these compliance efforts and they just don't want the hassle. But when that all hits, and that's why I think 2025 is really going to be when we see a significant price declines. Yes, I mean, people selling are absolutely going to impact your regular consumer who thinks their house is worth, $450,000 now. And suddenly, because there's distress selling, it's not even worth $225,000. I mean, these are real numbers that I'm seeing out there.
I'm going to bring Kalani back. He has a short-term rental question, and then I'm going to follow up with the big gorilla in the room because there is something hanging over the markets, in my opinion, and I really want your take on this. Kalani, please go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks, John. Hey, Melody. You and I had a lengthy conversation about a month ago about short-term rentals, in particular, what's happening on Maui. And my question to you, or to you now is, we talked about in some detail that Fed paper that came out about a year and a half ago that detailed how I think more than 50% of mortgages for short-term rentals exhibits occupancy fraud or mortgage fraud in general. And I'm wondering, are you seeing or hearing any municipalities, cities, or states starting to prosecute people for occupancy fraud in the short-term rental space?
Well, not the cities and counties, and because it really would be where, it's their contract that they're violating, and that's where, it's mortgage fraud, and so the FBI would have to get involved or the lending entity. But I do think the way that they'll do it, Kalani, is they'll start with the code violations. and so they may not enforce, they wouldn't be the ones enforcing the contract, like the due on sale clause if it's one of these private sub-2 note issues, or if it's just an investor loan that's non-owner occupied. But what the counties do, because this happened very much the last time as well, you did have a lot of investors in the market, think your strippers and things like that. They'll come in a sneaky way and start doing code violations. And somewhere like Pinellas County, which is actually where Marley Price is, they're very aggressive, and they can do things like $1,000 a day, and then that becomes a lien, and then they can take those properties to foreclosure. So that's a route that already exists today. I think that those are the types of things that will happen before you'll actually see banks or non-banks really going after that mortgage fraud, even though I wish that they would.
Don't many states or municipalities have local or state level laws similar to federal laws, mortgage fraud, occupancy fraud?
Well, they might on things like tax exemptions and things like that. Is that maybe what you're thinking of? Like if they're taking a homestead exemption, but they're not occupying the property. And then, I think a lot of local communities have, local rules about if you can rent out your property or how long somebody could stay. But mortgage fraud specifically is probably going to center around the contract.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
All right. It's time for my next annoying question, because I think this is an issue that people aren't paying attention to. And you have been very aggressive in saying, hey, guys, this is a lurking problem. After the COVID era, the pandemic, there were a lot of quote-unquote variable mortgages issued for, we'll call it not subprime, but just above subprime borrowers. And I still think that's a misnomer due to the variations and changes in the credit reporting agencies' evaluations. Do we have a problem with adjustable rates beginning to reset in year 3, 4, and 5 now, starting this year, or 2025?
Well, I wouldn't have thought so based on the volume, John, but I saw a recent article talking about ARMs resetting that really kind of surprised me. There's such a small percentage of the outstanding mortgages, because of the legacy, but it looks like what I think it is, John, is we've got a problem everywhere. We've got a problem in the non-traditional products, like the non-qualified mortgages. That, if you think about, that's all the private lending. That's about 5% of outstanding mortgages. And they're already, their delinquency is already higher than all of the other government mortgages. You've got problems in FHA, which is government subprime. You've got problems in VA. The rules are just so lax on VA. You can't really do a proper ability to repay. And then now you've really got your prime borrowers who are also coming under stress because of property taxes and insurance. So I think, you're going to have issues with that small percentage of ARMs. The other thing that Mr. Awesome and I talk about a lot is you're also going to start to have real problems as these buy downs start to reset. And they're going to, in reality, those started in earnest, I would say, in July of 2022. And so if you did a 3-2-1 buy down that's another headwind for 2025 as those things come due.
That brings the next question. We had a lot of quote-unquote investing houses or investors say, hi, I want to sit there and use these tools to sit there and buy houses and either A, flip them or turn them into long-term rentals. As has been highlighted, we've seen a lot of deterioration in the ability to get the asking price to cover the costs of those long-term rentals using their models. Is that going to be a backdoor surprise? Because, and you tell me if my dad is wrong. I learned all about this during the GFC. For every one home that defaults in an area, 10 more homes see a depreciation in their valuations. Is that still true?
Well, I can't say absolutely, but it will definitely be true. I mean, you know, the other thing about these properties is that when a property goes in default, they don't take care of the property. And the thing about when the bank or non-bank owns it, or it's on their books, the servicing is on their books, then they are required by the agencies to take care of that property, mow the grass, fix any code violations, winterize the property, take care of the mold. But in situations where perhaps, and this will be especially important with the all cash sales, where people aren't taking care of those properties and they're investors that have walked away or whatever, that's going to be even more of an issue. It definitely hit home values. And I think you're already seeing that, and hearing about it. So, and the squatting, I mean, Atlanta seems to be particularly hard hit because they have such a large percentage of institutional investment there, and they've got all kinds of squatter situations, because they have so much vacant long-term rentals. But did I answer your question or?
Spot on. Because I think that I'm agreeing with you 100% because I think that the institutional quote unquote incorporated investors can take the hit and walk away from a property, write it off, pay the penalties, and say, okay, I don't care, I don't hold that paper anymore, I don't hold that property anymore, and take their losses. Small LLCs, small companies, mom and pops who think this up, get rich quick from watching the stupid videos or going to the seminars, can't. But the larger institutions can, and I think that's going to cause a massive deterioration in values. And folks, for those of you who didn't pay attention the last time, it has an impact on municipal bonds, credit ratings, and the abilities of local communities to raise money because their credit ratings deteriorate due to a lack of income from those properties. Ulysses, awesome. Join in, please.
Hello, everybody. How are you all doing?
Excellent.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
So I'm curious to get your take on where things are moving. I know we've discussed it, but as far as pricing is concerned for the last month that's going to be published in the near future here.
Yeah, I think a lot of us on this call are going to have to swallow some rough news with existing home prices. I think we are going to hit another all-time high in June based on what I saw in my Redfin data, which I've kind of said tracks very closely to existing home sales. And so last month we broke an all-time high. It was shocking. I knew we were going to do it, but it's still shocking to see. And then this month, and you can look at the last 25 years, for existing homes, you always peak in June. For new homes, you typically peak in May. And so we will see a very high median existing home price when NAR does its announcements next week, unless they do some kind of crazy wonky adjustment. Well, they don't. Their prices are non-seasonally adjusted. So we should see that. On new homes, however, you know, you and I have talked about this. I think we saw last month the flip where new homes were actually lower than existing homes. And that had happened 2 times in the last 25 years, June of 2005 and June of 2021. And it corrected the next month. And of course, we're looking back at probably what was revised data. So it's going to be very interesting to see if that trend persists, and I believe existing will be much higher than new, because everyone needs to remember this is when median's really going to give you a false flag when the transactions are so low. And what's being transacted out there is just your higher tier, which you can look when you dive in to either the census result on the new homes or the NAR information on the existing homes. But Mr. Awesome, why don't you share what you think is going to happen because you track these new homes religiously as well.
I think that you are spot on there. I think that we're probably going to see sales tail off, but there's a legitimate possibility that given some of the rate buy-downs and the pricing incentives that I've seen reported and have witnessed firsthand, we might have a little bit higher new home price for June for new houses, but I think there's also more downward pressure. And for the first time, I noticed D.R. Horton is talking about inventory that's been sitting for 6 months or longer in their earnings call. Did you catch that?
I saw it. I've gotten to the point, it's just, I can't even listen to these things anymore because they're just so crazy. It's like you get on these earnings calls and they're so different from when I used to, that was one of my jobs. Like I did the investor deck for earnings, and I mean, what they say on these calls, we would have never gotten away with. It's hard to listen to, and it doesn't seem like the analysts ever pick up on things like that. I never seem to ask why. So, but yeah, I read it. It's hard for me to listen to these calls these days. They're a little too crazy.
What do you make of them actually acknowledging that? From my perspective, in the home building world, people running these companies are very good sales.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a knock. They're really good at it.
Yeah.
But it's telling to me that that was even a discussion.
I mean, I think you have to front run some of this stuff. Otherwise, with XHB being so high, if I were leading one of these companies, I feel like you want to put some of this stuff out there. I think someone like Lennar, I think they're going to be saved probably by some government bailout like they were last time, and they've been right there at all of the affordable building conversations and things like that. But I think you have to start putting some of this out there, or it's going to, when the bottom drops out, to me, if I were an investor, I'd file a lawsuit. So I would, you know what I mean? Like I feel like they have to put some of that out there.
That is a very good point, and I'm not advocating it, but I do find it interesting, the lack of shareholder, I don't know if I call it interest, but just questioning a lot of what's been said over the last 24 months. That's a very
totally. Yeah. I mean, they'll get there. Yeah. I mean, this is, but like you say, the builders are great salesmen. And I think I've told you before, in my company, we had a very large builder group, and they were the last ones to admit what was happening. And I remember it very clearly because, they were out on the golf course with all the builders, and they just had convinced, my business group that everything was going to be fine. And then overnight it was just like, boom. And I think in many ways, that's also why I feel people like Zellman have been a little surprised with this turn. I don't know if you would agree.
Yeah, I guess I do, but some of the commentary from the industry analysts make me question.
Yeah, their vested interests.
Yeah, definitely.
Agreed.
And this spring has definitely been interesting watching some of the commentary roll in that there's been a bit of a narrative shift, which I find kind of fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Agreed. And I mean, I think I want a couple more months behind me. But, I mean, to me, this was also inevitable. If I were an industry analyst and, some of these have been doing it for a very long time. I don't know that I could have written some of the things they've written with good conscience over the last 6 months.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
I wanted to throw one other thing at you because I know this is something that you have witnessed at great length in your travels, the excessive amount of actual development and lots that you see that it doesn't get reported. But I did confirm, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on it. I think it's a great subject and maybe vindicates a lot of what you've seen. But the for sale that's not started, that gets reported by the Census Bureau, those are only lots that are for sale that have a specific house plan that has already been submitted for permit. So that is not all of the available lots in it or across the country. Those are just ones that are actual spec lots with a plan submitted and authorized for permit. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that, given the disparity in how that gets reported across the industry.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I'm to the point that survey of construction, I mean, is just, it's a mess. And it is so hard to really understand what's going on. But I'm at the point that just based on what I've seen with my own eyes, is that whatever the builders say is out there, I think 3 to 4 times more, is really out there. And this is just, you can go to New Home Source is probably the best way to see this, and then go look at something like, Realtor.com. But yeah, I think there is a ton out there that's not being reported correctly. I think there's a ton of completed that's not being reported. Maybe they haven't gotten that final, certificate of occupancy.
Sure.
All right.
I think you're sorry guys.
That's okay.
I just had a call come in. Yeah. So I just okay. But yeah, I think you or Ulysses, I think that there's just so much more out there than is being reported, and we'll all see it soon.
All right, I'm gonna be the proverbial guy that always tests the compliance officers or throws the rolls of proverbial hand grenade into the room. And Melody, you have been fantastic this past hour. So I have the question that I think people don't think about: which will be the larger cause of the residential blow-up? Private equity funding getting in trouble, or regional and small banks?
It's feeling like, John, private equity first. What's so difficult is their tentacles are so hard to find in a structured way, but they're everywhere and everywhere you turn. And I think some of you have heard, I recently went to a private note sale conference in Nashville, and I believe that private equity has been involved at a much greater level than anybody realizes in the residential market, for sure. And I think that they're probably blowing up and they're not talking about it. And, but I think that will start there first. But these small regional banks as well, especially on the commercial real estate side, they are, it's just everywhere. I guess I would say, John, there's going to be a ton of distress there, as well as the big banks. For them to act like they're not in this, they don't have a lot of skin in this game. It's kind of crazy because they're the ones that have these syndicated loans, which they've sold some of that risk out as well. But I think this cycle, it's everybody.
That's what I was sort of fearing, because I think you're right. I think PE is going to lead this into a nightmare, which translates to those regional banks that sponsored a lot of those syndications. I don't see this having a happy ending, especially because there were just outrageously overvalued estimations and the valuations of some of the real estate.
Absolutely.
Well, Melody, I'm going to give this last 2 minutes to you to plug, because first of all, I'm going to make an invitation on behalf of MacroEdge. By the way, MacroEdge.net, Ozone, please sign up. 2-week free trial. Get the data you need to sit there and make wise investing decisions. Please plug your Substack. And by the way, I would love to have the DNN crew on one time as we go through the next quarter, right after, and sometime in September, to follow up on this, because these real estate updates, a lot of people don't understand. When I was doing this back in 07, 08 on the radio, most people didn't understand what it was leading to until it happened. You're doing a service by providing individuals the information they need to understand how that impacts their pensions, their retirement funds, and, of course, the property they own. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, so my Substack is M3 Melody Substack. And, yes, as you're saying, John, really my purpose for all of this is to educate consumers and investors on, what's ahead, the path that I see, based on my years of experience in mortgage, my deep diving into macro. And so I write the Substack and, I track 80 cities there. Each month I do a really detailed presentation on what's going on in those cities. So I encourage people to check that out. You can listen to those updates. I also do a YouTube. And then as you were saying, John, we just started the Doomers News Network and absolutely, Travis and Jack and I would love to come on. But what that truly is trying to bring you stories that you're not getting in mainstream media, trying to debunk the narrative out there and give you the details that are important so that you are armed with the information you need to make decisions for you and your family. And really, putting the viewers, the community over paid advertisement. And that's really so I hope people check that out as well. And we do typically a live show every week on the weekend. We'll be live tomorrow at 11 a.m. But I just want to say I'd like to plug you guys as well. DNN are, avid followers of MacroEdge. And as you say, John, I participate every day talking to all of you guys. And the level of expertise and knowledge in that group is just amazing. And I feel smarter every time I go over there. So very appreciative to all of you. And thank you so much for having me on.
Melody, I thank you for taking the time out this Friday afternoon. And, folks, there's a good chance we're going to shift the time for these programs to this time of day, one, to accommodate everyone's schedule, and two, so we can get some of the individuals like Melody, like the DNN crew, and others to join us at a much more reasonable time. We understand that 9 p.m. on Friday nights is a tough time for many. We're going to try and do more of this for MacroEdge.net and MacroEdge Radio number 15. This is John Galt speaking. Have a great afternoon. Good day.